deadlift 500 pounds, run a sub 5-minute mile. How are you setting up a week of training? Like, how do you even approach that? What is the thought process or analysis that you might work through?
Fatigue masks fitness, which is, I believe, one of the biggest reasons that cardio kills gains, bro. Monday would be your heavy triples, doubles, singles on the deadlift, so your main movement focus, top end intensity. And then we would probably work an athlete up to doing that the same day as their hardest effort session at the track.
Do you have like a ratio that you try to follow in your planning that you try to hit?
For some people, it might be 5 lifting sessions a week out of the 10 to achieve that goal. For some, it might be 2. The 1,200 pound total and sub 12-hour Ironman on the same day was 3 lifting sessions a week, and they were not as demanding as the 4 lifting sessions a week that I did for the 600 kilo powerlifting total the same day as a sub 6 hour 60K. But that was a long day out, that one.
We're going deep in a discussion with one of the best hybrid athletes on the planet, Fergus Crawley, and we're going to start right now. How do you squat 500 pounds and run a sub 5-minute mile in the same morning? Fergus Crawley provides all these answers. We dive deep into what does threshold training do? What does heavy resistance training do to you? As far as fatigue management is concerned, how can you actually analyze the different aspects around fatigue management to improve your aerobic capacity, improve your max strength, lift the Husafel stone? All of these different topics are what we dive deep into. And at the end, stick to the end because we go deep into aspects around mental health and mental health awareness. This podcast is absolutely fantastic. Let's get started. All right, Fergus. So I've got a ton of questions. And one of the first things that I wanted to ask you is related to how you set up your training. And if I have a football player, right, or an American football player or shot putter or something, I can look at it and say, all right, in a sport here, we've got, squat will help them increase this characteristic that'll contribute to their sports performance. In a hybrid setting that you're typically in with your crazy challenges, let's go deadlift 500 pounds, run a sub 5-minute mile. How are you setting up a week of training? Like, how do you even approach that? What is the thought process or analysis that you might work through?
So it's a great question because essentially this is the essence of S&C, isn't it? It's what are we trying to understand to determine what to apply, and then how do we measure and adapt as time goes on with the more data that we get. So this is no different to any other equation, not different to what you do with your athletes, but for us, and always for how I've trained and with the sort of methodology we use at Omnia, there are a few key principles that kind of underpin it at a macro level, but then it's largely down to individual strengths, weaknesses, training background, the usual stuff, all the obvious things. But I think in a hybrid training setting or a concurrent strength and endurance training setting, the individual's strengths and weaknesses are even more important, because if in that example you've got a great deadlift, there might not be as much work to be done, there might not be as much adaptive energy required from a training point of view as there is with the mile. If you come from a mile background, great example with Nick Symmonds, when he was coming from sub 4-minute mile shape to working up to deadlifting 500 pounds, and I think he could only just break 5 once he got to the 500. So a very, very different background. So in general terms, there's a few key principles in terms of methodology that with every athlete we work with, we will use to underpin that problem solving. First of all is that fatigue masks fitness. And this is kind of the first thing that we want athletes to understand when it comes to balancing strength and endurance, which is, I believe, one of the biggest reasons that cardio kills gains, bro, carried so much weight in the past is because of that concept, whereby the more training load accumulated across more disciplines, the more fatigue that will be accumulated, and the less your performance will show itself when under fatigue, which is where peaking, tapering, deloads come in so that fitness can reveal itself, which for anyone that's used to linear periodization or anything like that, it can be a bit of an ego check initially, where week 1, you can be hitting 4 plates for a set of 5. And then in week 8, you might hit 4 plates for a set of 4. However, you've got 8 weeks of fatigue under your belt, which actually means that 180 for a set of 4 was pretty good going. So that's a sort of macro level thing to consider with everyone as we move things forwards. From an actual structural point of view, we like to work on a sort of inverse volume and intensity curve, whereby we peak intensity at the start of the week and peak volume at the end of the week, and invert those as the week goes on. So heaviest, fastest earlier in the week, longest, slowest, later in the week. So if we map that out within the deadlift and mile example, let's say that Monday would be your heavy triples, doubles, singles on the deadlift, so your main movement focus, top end intensity. And then we would probably work an athlete up to doing that the same day as their hardest effort session at the track, pairing that intensity together, accepting a little bit of a compromise in the quality of the execution, but that's so that we're only recovering from a high intensity bout of lower body output once within the context of that week or microcycle. So initially, we'd probably start an athlete with heavy lower on a Monday, hard effort track on the Tuesday, but looking to consolidate that into one AM, PM session on Monday so that we can allow for more volume as the rest of the week goes on, but obviously athlete dependent. Tuesday would probably be upper body assistance work and some easy aerobic work just to keep things ticking over. Wednesday would be more tempo, sub-threshold, maybe some assistance work from a sort of 6 to 10 rep range area, targeting weak points. I've taken a huge amount personally from Louis Simmons, West Side, really hammering West Side's methodology with weak points, highlighting movement variations on main movements from an SBD point of view, and actually just the fun of it as well. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, where things become a little bit more aerobic, a little bit more sets of 12 to 15, a little bit lighter, a little bit more RP7, that sort of stuff. And we found that by having that intensity peaking at the start of the week and the volume at the end, it allows for quite a predictable understanding of how an athlete responds to that accumulative fatigue. Because I personally get hammered by intensity, but can take volume all day. There's people that are the other way around, and that relationship will quickly show itself within that curve we found. And the main thing really is it allows for sort of an inbuilt recovery mechanism whereby you're grouping biomechanically speaking, not energy system speaking. It's similar, but they're not the same energy systems. Your creatine phosphate system isn't active at the track as it is in lifting if you're training for a mile. Not the same level, but they are both high intensity, lower body, biomechanically speaking, bouts of output. So by pairing them that way, again, it's within that 7-day period. If we've got 12 weeks to train, we want as many high quality, high intensity sessions as possible. And we want to we want to maximize the amount of recovery between them. But we are trying to balance progress in two challenging disciplines concurrently. And that's the crux of why we need to look at things a little bit differently, because you can take conventional S&C from a strength point of view, but it starts to be unraveled a little bit once you add in the cumulative fatigue from training for a mile, because training for a mile is not a forgiving thing to go to work towards. So that's a bit of an overview of the sort of the volume and intensity relationship. I think the other key consideration will be a few sort of more scientifically reinforced things, which is just how do you prioritize your training within the same day where possible, which is obviously research indicates that if you can prioritize strength work because there's more of a degradation of skill with it, then that's great. But we're big proponents ultimately that unless you're a professional athlete, practicality should be your number one focus point, because getting the training done in the first place has more of an emphasis on your outcome than worrying too much about the granular detail does, in our opinion. And that's something that I've always tried to focus on whilst building the business. Lots of travel is, if I get too lost in the details of trying to optimize for every little thing that I can, I lose sight of what's practical and what I can actually get done. And getting the training done, we think, is first and foremost the most important thing. Other key considerations are that there's an element of turning up certain dials and turning down certain dials, and that's where highlighting the individual strengths and weaknesses are really important. So again, if you come from a strength background versus an endurance background, you'll have different strengths and weaknesses, you'll have different skill levels, you'll have different dormant skills, you'll have different things that you can adapt to quickly. And with that, it's important to not think that you need to train like a powerlifter and train like a mile runner, because there's a middle ground that you're trying to find. And it might mean that you're a little bit more training like a mile runner than you are a powerlifter because you come from a powerlifting background, or vice versa. So again, research tends to indicate that you can maintain your strength and muscle mass with about 30% of the volume required to build it. And that's where that can be one of the best things that you can utilize when you're making room for a little bit of adaptation in something novel. For me, when I did the 500-pound back squat and sub 5-minute mile on the same day, I had never trained for a mile before in my life. My background had been rugby playing and then a few ultra endurance activities, and was getting into triathlon at the time. But COVID meant that the triathlon I was training for Didn't happen. So I thought, right, let's pivot towards this foolish endeavor. And nothing has humbled, beaten me up, and made me question everything more than training for a sub 5 minute mile whilst trying to hold on to my 500-pound squat. So the biggest lesson for me there was just how much of an impact strength training can have on your running output, and how much of an impact your running output can have on strength training when it comes to fatigue management, when it comes to your ability to generate power, and how you can learn to feel and adjust that and structure that within the week. But more importantly, I went from being indoctrinated into doing a heavy single, 3 back off sets between 3 to 5 reps, variation work, assistance work, and then sets of 15 on leg press, unilateral work, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of volume. And then I actually felt that I could hold on to that top end strength with a heavy single and some speed work to follow. And that was a really useful exercise for me. So I think trial and error is a big, big part of this as well. But if we strip it right back to the sort of original question of how do we assess for an athlete, it's everything worked backward from the goal. So if you came to me and said, I want to run 50 kilometers, we'll work in miles. I want to run 50 miles and deadlift 500 pounds. Okay, great. That gives us some parameters to work within. Let's take one step back from there. Okay, where are we currently on these things? Let's hit some baseline testing on some key metrics. Okay, we now have some more parameters to work within. Let's take another step back. How much time availability do you have? What is accessible at what times of the day around kids, around work, et cetera, et cetera? What is your experience with volume? What is your experience with intensity? What is your tolerance for it over time? How are you eating at the moment? All of these things. And then we try and look from there. And at a one-to-one level, engage in some trial and error. At a generalized level, there's a bit of an element of training this way where you kind of bash your head against the wall until either your head breaks or the wall breaks. It's kind of a way that I've always liked to look at it. And I've very much felt like my head's broken a few times, but I do very much feel like I've broken through the wall a few times as well, which is great. And that's the fun of this for me. I think that's the real key thing that I want to emphasize is that's why I always want to work backwards from the goal with the athlete, because I really want to understand why they're interested in that and what the joy of the process is going to be. Because I think compliance and execution and practicality are the two things that I personally believe trump all of the optimality research, all of the optimization bros stuff that's going on, because for 99% of us that aren't professional athletes, we need to integrate training into our day-to-day lives. And the enjoyment of the process is the thing that allows for the enjoyment of the outcome, because it means you can get to the outcome having earned the right to be there. So long-winded answer. And I've skimmed over a few points that we can deep dive on a little bit more. But from a methodological point of view, the things that really underpin it, I think I've covered for the most part. And we like to have some pillars of the methodology that get the best out of the athlete, but it is always going to be a sense of trial and error. And it's always going to be a sense of playing to certain strengths, weaknesses, biomechanics, leverages, all these sort of things. I have short femurs, which is great for squatting, but it means that if you look at me running a mile, I don't look like a striding gazelle, put it that way. So we've all got some compromise. So that's an overview. Hopefully that covers things off in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I did want to point out, if anybody's watched your 4 miles every 4 hours and 96 hours, which is absolute insanity. The first thing, my wife and I watched this like 3 days ago, and Caitlin's like, dude, his quads are huge. I'm like, yeah, he does. That's, I think it shows the short femurs aspect. So, I wanted to echo that. Now, there's a lot of stuff that you threw out there. One of the things you mentioned was sort of like the background. I guess I wanted to touch on this a little bit. Do you find if somebody comes from a strength background, or, when you compare a strength background to a strength endurance background, or a strength background to an endurance background, is there a typical response that you see, like strength athletes handle intensity more, endurance volume more, or is that like, it just still depends?
So I think the biggest constant that I've noticed, and I'd be interested to get your take on this as well, because I'm sure you'll have seen similar, is that I believe that an individual's biomechanical awareness, if they come from a strength training background, and therefore their perception of RPE, their understanding of how to move their body, why their body moves in certain ways, is much better than coming from an endurance background. And I think that comes from strength and hypertrophy is ultimately applied and controlled understanding of tension, whereas endurance is kind of controlled looseness, so to speak. And I think that's where if somebody comes from a pure endurance background with no S&C whatsoever, and you ask them to do a bodyweight squat, they don't know why their femurs would move in a certain way, or how their hips should be positioned, or what they should do with their knees, or how they should drive their feet into the ground. Whereas if you asked a powerlifter, a 140 kilo, 300 pound powerlifter, to say, run in a straight line, yes, we've all got the motor skill of running, but I'm sure if they ran in a straight line, they'd quickly hit their feet off the ground and go, oh, I'm not doing this properly. And they'd maybe be able to take a second and go, right, I feel like I'm slamming this into the ground. We're getting that sensation in my hips here. How could I manipulate this? And I'm not saying that a 300 pound powerlifter is going to pick it up straight away, but the thought process is instilled. And I think that allows for a slightly quicker skill acquisition than the other way around, because strength training is a skill. I think we often forget that when you've been lifting for years and years, it is a skill. And that's when you see the best powerlifters in the world. I mean, Colton Engelbrecht at the moment, John Hackle, these guys, their warm-ups and their top sets, the only difference is the weight on the bar, unless they're hitting a proper third attempt grinder. Everything moves the same. It's a skill that's well executed, well practiced. And the same if you looked at a runner, every stride is the same. They're moving really, really efficiency. And at whatever level, efficiency is the outcome that we're kind of optimizing for. And that comes through training and that comes through practice. I think the understanding of nutrition from a strength training background is more functional on a day-to-day basis. I think the understanding of performance nutrition from a getting the best out of your training session is better from an endurance point of view. But I think there's a lot of triathletes I've spoken to, for example, that don't really have any understanding of how many calories they're taking in a day. They don't really have any understanding of why a certain food is only bad within the right context, and that certain things aren't bad objectively when it can be utilized for fuel. And I think that comes from obviously manipulating body composition, manipulating body weight for strength categories and things like that. But yeah, I think both have got a lot to learn from one another. And that's the beauty of it, in that the lessons, there's very valuable lessons that can be taken from both. And you can only learn those lessons by participating in and progressing in both. I think being able to control tension and to control looseness is a great skill to have. And to be able to master those skills is a really good place to be, because it's more physical mastery of yourself and understanding how you as an individual move. Are there any inefficiencies you can address? And then the best thing about that, again, tying it back to real base level S&C, is how do we make weaknesses strengths? And then that will make us a more robust individual overall. And my opinion on this is the word hybrid training has kind of spiraled a bit out of control, and it kind of means whatever people want it to mean now. But at its core, I love the idea of it, because it allowed me to explore myself, my surroundings, and my abilities in a way that wasn't limited. And that was within the context of a non-professional athlete who had no aspirations to be the best at any one thing in the world. I train and always have trained for self-development, enjoyment, and a measurable sense of progress in my day-to-day life. And the amount of lessons that I've learned from pivoting to more of endurance stuff over the years, and all of the lessons I've taken from strength over the years, and the amalgamation of all that is amazing, and something that I'm incredibly grateful for, and why I'm such a big evangelist for this style of training, whatever you want to call it. To become competent running, swimming, biking, hiking, climbing, whatever it might be, I don't care. And to be able to move a barbell, a kettlebell, a stone, is an understanding of how to move your body and what it requires to be able to do that thing. That is a really, really simple measurement of input versus output. And yeah, I like the simplicity of training in many ways, even though, yeah, the bigger the race, the less simple it becomes, and the more variables cannot go your way. But yeah, I think the world's very gray, whereas training can be quite black and white, which is why I like it so much.
Real quick, guys, our podcast is sponsored by our own strength training app, Peak Strength. Inside of Peak Strength, we have a program known as Athletic Fitness. And inside of Athletic Fitness, you can select the goals if you want to train for more muscle mass, if you want to increase your endurance, if you want to increase your athletic ability through being more explosive. There's so many different routes to help you develop that athletic fitness. All you've got to do is click that first link in the description or the first comment, the pinned comment, and you can head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store, download Peak Strength. And then once you get inside of Peak Strength, make sure that you activate your program by selecting that athletic fitness program. Now, let's get back to the video and listen to Fergus talk about some of the crazy things that he's done in the hybrid fitness world. Okay, so you did mention stone, so that triggered one thing I had written down was you recently lifted the Husafell stone.
Yep.
And which is absolutely incredible, impressive, awesome. Congrats. I think that's like a legendary status. And I wanted to bring up, like, when you're training, because you mentioned something about the mile and even the squatting, the 500 pounds, and you have done, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, 600K powerlifting total the same day that you did a 60K run, or like a
sub 6. Yeah. So 600 kilo total, same day as a sub 6 hour, 60 kilometer ultra,
okay,
which is about 37 miles ish.
Which
is
wild. Before we get back to the Husafell, didn't you do something crazy too, where a powerlifting comp with a full distance triathlon as well?
Yep. Yeah. That was, I like the neatness of, so the 500-pound squat and sub 5 minute mile was the first. That was the gateway drug. And I like the neatness of the numbers. So exactly 1 year on from that, I did a 1,200-pound powerlifting total the same day as a sub 12-hour Ironman.
That's right.
That was a long day out, that one.
Okay, so looking at the complexity of sub 12-hour, you're also getting close to having me PR on my note-taking ability. But looking at this full triathlon, when I'm thinking through some of this stuff, so the Husafell stone, when you lifted this, do you find it's easier if you're training for something where it is like you're lifting the stone, it's unique, it's an odd object, to maintain your endurance? What is it, during that time where you're prepping for something like the stone, how is it easier to just say, I'm just going to maintain and just do like LSD work, I'll get on the bike 2 hours a day, or I'll run, or whatever? How is it easier to do it to do LSD? Or, and I guess where I'm trying to go with this is, when you mentioned the 500-pound sub 5 minute mile, it seemed like maybe the higher intensity speed stuff, the higher intensity running work might beat you up a little bit. It might take you more to recover from.
So I think, so there's a couple things here, and I think the blanket statement to start with, for me personally, and for a lot of the athletes we've worked with, intensity in either strength training or endurance training is the thing that can bury you quickly. And the 500-pound squat and sub 5 minute mile, I mean, what was mind blowing to me was that the correlation between the two wasn't linear and consistent either. There was one day where I was meant to have 190 kilos, which is about 425 pounds, for 3 sets of 4. And I went to hit a 170 warm up, which is about 375 pounds. And it was a proper grinder, like an RPE 9. I thought I just misgrooved it. I was like, yeah, I've just misgrooved it. Nah, I'll be fine. Loaded up 190, unracked it, and just dumped it straight away. It just felt like the world was on my shoulders. Fatigue was sky high. And I thought, I've now got to go to the track in a couple of hours. There's going to be an absolute, should I even bother going? But I was quite early into the process where, was I in the position I am now, I probably would have missed that track session. But I went to the track that night, and I'd say that was the second best track session I had of that whole prep. I had 5x500s, 5 minute rest, and then another 5x500s. And the aim was for them all to be at 5 minute mile pace or quicker, which is about 307. It's 307 per kilometer for anyone that works in non-freedom units. And it was hard. It was hard. The first 500 I sent really quickly. I think I overcooked myself a little bit in the first 500, so I had to work a lot harder in the rest. But I felt powerful. I felt snappy. And I finished that session. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Because I had nothing in my life. I felt genuinely, you'll have had it before, I'm sure. You're on a rack of bar and you step back and you're like, it's like your muscles are made of, there's just nothing there. It's a feeling I couldn't describe.
You feel like a bitch.
Yeah, that's it. I felt like a little bitch or a big bitch. I'm not sure on the situation. Just bang in the middle. I felt like a bitch, and then I went to the track and had one of the best sessions I've had. And that's one of the things that really sparked my curiosity on, okay, intensity is one thing, volume is another, fatigue is one thing. There's cumulative fatigue, there's localized fatigue, there's systemic fatigue. You can't lump it all in one bucket. And the more I practice and experience my sensation of all of these things, the better attuned I will become at understanding when the fatigue is strength related, when the fatigue is endurance related, when the fatigue is systemic, when the fatigue is localized, when it's okay to push through, when it's not okay to push through. And that in and of itself is a skill I've developed. But I do think so. Let's use the 1,200 pound total and sub 12 Ironman as an example. Had I been pushing, so a sub 12 Ironman's a respectable time. It's not setting the world on fire by any means. I think the average Ironman finishing time in men worldwide is 12 hours and 52 minutes. So sub 12 is a milestone for sure. And then the next notable milestone is sub 10, where you're quick at that point. That's moving. If I was to train for sub 10, I would have had a much harder time holding on to that 1,200 pound total because of the increase in volume required to elicit the adaptation that I haven't previously experienced coming from a non-triathlon background to get to sub 10. And obviously, if you need to accumulate more volume in an endurance discipline to push that needle forwards in terms of time, that's less time available for strength training and more fatigue. And that is a balancing act that you can ride for a little while, but you'll inevitably hit a point where you feel like you've been hit by a train. And I think that's something that everybody needs to go through when managing this process, because I think you need an ego death if you're going to try and, we call it optimizing the suboptimal, which is you are accepting a compromise when you are engaging in hybrid training or trying to progress in concurrent disciplines simultaneously, because disciplines, the whole premise of hybrid training was concurrent progress in disciplines that do not inherently support one another. So conflicting disciplines. So swim, bike, and run are separate disciplines, but they all complement one another in terms of aerobic capacity, in terms of the development towards triathlon. Heavy squat, bench, and deadlift singles don't make you a better triathlete in the same way that swimming, biking, and running volume doesn't make you a better powerlifter. Obviously, a little bit of step work, maybe the ability to run a 5K is very good for your health as a powerlifter, as a strength athlete, but there's diminishing returns that are quite aggressive beyond a certain point in terms of actual performance and training, where, yeah, I think the biggest, I've experienced it most with marathon prep, whereby the amount of intensity volume required beats me up a lot more than just out and out output. So if I was running 100 kilometers a week, let's say we'll use miles for this example. If I was running 100 miles a week and it was all zone 2, I think I'd be able to do that sustainably as long as I was eating enough, as long as I didn't have travel and like the perfect world. Right. 100 miles a week, I could run that sustainably at points in the past if it was all zone 2. If you put 2 5 to 10 miler at sub threshold or threshold in there on concrete, I think I'd last 2 weeks. Just because that spike in intensity, especially at a higher body weight as well. This is where running as a specific, I think running and lifting is probably the most popular combination here. But there are practical considerations that come with this as well, even down to how you move through the water, how you position yourself on the bike. But running, the impact, the transient impact load going through every stride is enormous because you've got a higher body weight. And look, I had a stress fracture in May, which is my first. I was
going to say, is that part, do you think, I did want to ask if you think, one, if that was part of your hip, and I did have another side question about it, but do you think that led to your hip injury?
I wish I'd pay a lot of money for somebody to go, this is what caused it. It definitely contributed.
Yeah.
And I'll never know for sure, but I was working, the big focus for me with that marathon prep was addressing an inefficiency equation that doesn't play to my favor, but it does with squatting. So short femurs. So there's 2 things here. All of the research on runners of a heavier body weight generally comes from those runners being taller, which means that heavier body weight is compensated for largely with a longer stride length. I am not that tall. I'm 5'11", and my femurs relative to my height are quite short, which means that I'm disproportionately heavy relative to height and relative to a lot of research on running and injury and volume and all that sort of thing, which makes me very, very inefficient because the amount of load going through every stride, because I've got quite a choppy stride compared to a runner that might be taller, even a runner that was my height normally, that was lighter but had regular length femurs, would be less susceptible. But I was doing that prep at about 93 kilos, which is about 204, 205 pounds. And I felt great until I didn't. And a big focus in that prep for me was increased volume. So that was the highest mileage I've ever done. And I did more sustained tempo and sub-threshold output than I ever have done before. Upon reflection, I was working with a professor of inefficiency out of a university in America. Actually, sort of, he was advising me on a few things here and there because that was a focus point for him. And with hindsight, we probably we didn't rush it, but I think, was I to do it again, if I could rewind, I would have pushed volume or intensity, not both.
Okay.
And I think the body weight I was at, and the only reason I'm still not 100% wanting to say that I got so much fitter. I was in a phenomenal place. I mean, my peak week was really, the last session of my peak week was amazing. I felt great. Fatigue felt well managed. I moved super, super well. I could have run sub 3 that day. No problem. I felt amazing. And then I woke up the next day.
This is in a marathon.
Yeah, this was training for a marathon. Yeah. So my peak week session was a 5K warm up, zone 2, and then 20 kilometers at race pace. And no, it was 6K warm up, 6K cool down, and 20 kilometers at race pace. And I ran the whole race pace section, which was done on heart rate. So the aim was keep basically 160 is your max heart rate, run around there. If you see it go above 160, bring the pace down just to get it down a little bit. And that was my metric for the day. I ran 11 seconds per kilometer. So about 18 seconds per mile, quicker than I needed to for sub 3 the whole time. And I was conversational. My heart rate was in a great place. I'd responded really, really well to the training. But in those last few weeks, I had a bit of travel. And again, extreme accountability here. There were a few sessions that I probably should have scaled back because I was on 4 hours sleep from a flight the night before. But this was the challenge of that period. It was a real squeeze. And what I don't like about marathon training is how binary and metric driven it is. Mm-hmm. When missing a session feels like you're going to not hit the volume for the week, or you need to play catch up, or like we've said, you're just being a bitch. And that is the only training prep where I've ever wrestled with that in a way that I didn't really like. I didn't really like that version of myself. It became very, you said you were going to run 70 miles this week, therefore you have to run 70 miles this week. Otherwise you are falling short of what you said you were going to do. So lots of very interesting lessons psychologically as well as physically. But what I know is that the increased volume and the sustained tempo and sub-threshold efforts elicited a huge amount of gain in my running, a lot of which is actually still with me, fascinatingly, in terms of my pace, even post-injury. My zone 2 pacing is still faster than it was pre that marathon prep, even having had the injury recovery. So very valuable lessons, but yeah, you don't fail, you only learn is kind of the way that I view these things. But yeah, with hindsight, addressing the inefficiency that came from the body weight and the femur length, a more conservative approach would have been to experiment with higher volume and maybe one intense session a week, or higher intensity and a lower than average volume for a sub 3 prep, for example. We pushed things hard, and it was a bit of a risk, and I accepted at the start of the prep that I want to push this hard. I want to give this my all because I don't want to do it again. And rolled the dice and didn't go my way, which is first serious injury I've had in almost over a decade, actually. So it's I've had a good run. Pun intended. And to be honest, I'm probably due some more severe injuries. So if that's it, I'll take it. But yeah, I think that the summary of that one was really valuable lesson for me with my relationship with marathon training. And I liked it. It didn't feel as explorative of my surroundings or of yeah, my surroundings was the big one. I live in Scotland. I've got amazing trails. I've got amazing hills. I've got all these things. And I found myself planning the flattest possible route that I could to control the environment as much as I could, which it became very much about the metrics. And I became obsessive about the metrics in a way that was only in service of the metrics, not actually in why I wanted to do this in the first place. So valuable lesson there. Physically, I know that the higher volume had huge aerobic benefits. I know that the intensity brought my top end speed right up. I'll carry those lessons into the future and try and avoid the stress fracture. But to circle right back, yes, but increased body weight comes with increased risk, and that needs to be managed with a sensible training load. I've managed to do that for a long, long time, and I've pushed myself very, very hard. Stress fractures and runners aren't an uncommon thing at all. I'd definitely say my body weight contributed to it at my end, but it's not the only reason. In the same way that there's 60 kilo runners out there that have had stress fractures that could come from under eating or could come from reds or something like this. So I really do wish that I could have someone point at my hip and go, this on this day at this time caused this. I'd very much like to know that information.
How wide is your squat stance? I did want to ask that.
So it's varied over the years. So peak powerlifting was just outside of, I experimented with I'd say probably much more open hips sitting back, because I had a pair of, I was experimenting with a pair of like Inza, what were they, THP? Or there was a pair of wraps. I had a lot of stopping power.
Okay.
And I trained at a gym that had monoliths and everything. And I was just kind of having fun with it. Deadlift bars, monoliths. And I thought, yeah, I'll try a pair of wraps. This will be good fun. So sat back a little bit more there. That was wider. But whenever I looked at any videos, you could see I was kind of bleeding power by folding in a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if I was low bar squatting, I'd be just outside shoulder width and sort of 15 degrees with my feet.
Okay.
If I'm high bar squatting, I'm kind of shoulder width and 20 degrees with my feet. But I have had an issue. Left hip has been a bit of an issue for the past couple of years on and off. I've had bursitis with it. And yeah, glute med work is something I need to maintain pretty consistently at all times, especially when fatigue gets high. And ultimately, these are lessons I've only learned, fortunately, through pushing things to sort of crossing new thresholds, which is kind of ultimately, I'm sure any athlete you've worked with will, as soon as they're pushing and pushing and pushing, that's when, okay,
it's like getting to the breaking point and then playing around there and then slightly coming back is.
Yeah. And I read something the other day. I can't remember what, it might have been a meme or a tweet or something, but it was like, there's no better way to know that you're about to get an injury than when you're hitting random PRs in the gym or something like that.
Literally,
when you're accidentally peaking,
and then you want to go again. Let's try PR again. Then you blow out something.
Oh, herniate the disc. Damn it. There we go.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned that how you kept the speed from that work and how that destroyed you. But now your pace, your normal pace right now, is so much quicker, even at that lower heart rate. Were you testing your VO2 max at all, like during that time, that you could then see like, oh, well, my VO2 max went up to this point, and even when I came back from my injury, I could maintain that? Is that anything you ever measured?
So I wish I'd done lab testing, but I had so much travel during that period that whenever I tried to make it work for a YouTube video, the timings never did. So all I had was, everything was just based off chest strap heart rate data and Garmin's estimates, which on VO2 were as useful as they are not useful. But for example, my lactate heart rate threshold was 352 towards the end of my marathon prep, and my zone 2, so my aerobic pacing was about 450 per kilometer, which is about 745 per mile. And injury, I was back on so context was marathon prep was February through to May. End of May was the marathon. I actually turned up to the marathon, even though I didn't run for the 3 weeks before it. Because we didn't know for certain it was a stress fracture beforehand. It's the whole of the story there. But basically, early April was when peak week finished, and I had an issue with my hip. We thought it was tendinopathy. We thought it was just that bursitis coming back, so we let it settle. And then during the marathon itself, it fully gave way from under me and was very, very painful. And I foolishly, being a stubborn Scottish man, finished the marathon anyway. So that was a very, very, very painful what was it, 9K? Yeah, that was awful. I'd rather not dwell on that one. But it was, I thought what I should have done, I started getting a bit of hip pain in my hip at about 1 hour and 20 minutes, so just before the half marathon mark on the actual day of the marathon. But it was my A race at that point, and I thought, you know what, there's the additional pressure of I've done a big YouTube series about this. It was on home turf, all of that stuff. And again, if I had a crystal ball, I would have gone back and just said, no, there's an injury here. It hasn't gone your way. Move on. Don't make it worse. But I'm a foolish man. So here we are. Cool. So yeah, it went from under me at I went out in the half marathon in 126, 127, I think. And honestly, at that point, I should have just, as soon as there was a little bit of pain, or just a sensation of the hips getting a bit angry, I should have stopped. But I just kept going. And so end of May was when we had the stress fracture diagnosis because it was so bad after the marathon. Do as I say, not as I do in this situation, by the way. For anyone listening this is your first interaction with me, this is the first time I've been foolish with behavior like this. It was, again, the obsession that came with the marathon distance, the time, the metric, the outcome. It kind of made me abandon some of my principles a little bit. Add in home turf, add in YouTube series, add in some amazing people along the way doing the marathon themselves, really, really supporting me, having watched that YouTube series, and add in a bit of ego. And here we are. Anyway,
equals injury.
Yeah, exactly. I was already injured. The ego made me injure myself, made the injury worse, which is actually way stupider. So good work, Fergus. But MRI diagnosis. So that was end of May. So June, 2 weeks into June, I was back on the turbo trainer doing aerobic work. Because there was no issue with my hip there. If I went above about 260 watts, I'd start to feel it a little bit. I'd feel my glute med sort of pulling and my hip getting angry. And aerobic only worked for 6 weeks. Then I worked in a little bit of intensity, but not really high heart rate stuff, just kind of zone 3. And then when was it? Mid-August, I was back outdoors on the bike. And then second week of September, I was back running. First run, I did 3K at 144 heart rate at 5:01 per K, which is just over 8 minutes per mile. And I was genuinely shocked I felt biomechanically, musculoskeletally, felt like an idiot. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I felt clunky. I felt heavy. And every time I looked down at my watch and thought, why is that? This must be wrong. I'm moving too quickly here. My heart rate's going to spike. I felt inefficient, but aerobically, I felt really, really good. And I think to circle back to something that I forgot to say earlier on the body weight point and the lessons and the value, I'm happy I got injured because it's taught me some very valuable lessons about my relationship with marathon training, about my relationship with volume, with intensity, with my own ego, with the bike as well. Because what I've seen is a focused increase in tempo and sub-threshold work to raise my capacity, supplemented with higher volume aerobic work, led to a really, really positive outcome with my running ability. And that was still whilst focusing heavily on bench press, still whilst maintaining deadlifting, squatting, and I was moving everything well. I then came back to running in September after several months, having only spent time on a turbo trainer, a static fixed bike with a huge amount of aerobic work. That is the only thing that I was doing aerobically, and therefore the only thing logically which would indicate would indicate my maintenance of my aerobic ability. So the conditioning was maintained, but the specificity musculoskeletally was lost, i.e. the skill of running degraded, but the actual underlying under the hood engine was just dormant. And that was a really valuable lesson for me, which means if I was to do another prep now for a marathon, I think I'd probably focus much more on intensity and supplement my aerobic volume with much more of an emphasis on cross-training and aerobic work coming from other movements that don't involve as much impact from a running point of view.
Okay, so that's a question selfishly I wanted to ask is would you argue, like, let's say, okay, using me as an example, I weigh any time between 220 and 235.
Okay.
If I'm laying out, I have two questions. Based off of what you said, if I would do, let's say, a threshold day, like a high intensity day, threshold day on a rower, where I can get my heart rate spike, go up and down for 60 minutes. And then the LSD, like my easy stuff as I'm running, would you argue there will likely be a carryover from the threshold work on the rower?
Yes. And I think that definitely. However, obviously specificity is and always will be king, whereby your ability to output intensity when running won't be as conditioned as your ability to output intensity when it comes to the rowing. So that's where your musculoskeletal conditioning and your ability to turn over your legs for your muscles to move that fast. I saw a really, really interesting graph earlier today. I'll see if I can find it actually, which was comparing the utilization of different parts of the lower body at different paces. So it was peak muscle forces running at 740 per mile versus 3 minute per mile.
Okay.
So this was posted by, I don't know how this came up my feed, but it's posted by stephmunt.dpd. So at 740 pace, for example, your soleus is working almost equally versus 3 minute per mile pace. What's really interesting is your iliopsoas and your hamstring is working about 5 times as hard in terms of multiples of body weight with force once you're at the 3 minute mile pace. Obviously, 3 minute per mile is very, very fast. But what's interesting is the disparity between 740 versus 3 is so big on the hamstring versus the iliopsoas, which on most, so your glute med, your vasta, your soleus, rec fem, all quite similar. But then once you get speedier, that's where your posterior chain, your iliopsoas is used a lot more. So that's where I brought that up, because when you implement higher intensity running, it's so much more demanding than high intensity rowing that it's something that I think a lot of people can rush into too quickly or spike volume too quickly, and needs to be treated like you're building somebody from scratch with a barbell, and especially with a higher body weight, because that data will not be based on people weighing 220 to 235. That data will be based, like I was saying earlier, the data on anything with body weight is largely correlative to height. So that will be based on recreational runners who typically are built like runners.
Yeah.
So if you add in that force, if you start doing 4x400s, I'm pulling numbers out of my arse here, these are arbitrary, but that might be the equivalent of a trained running only person who weighs 160 pounds doing 15 400s. The transient impact load, even if it feels like it's something sustainable. So it's there's no one size fits all approach with it, but there's definitely merit to trying to consider what ability do I have under the hood? What ability do I have sort of on the hood, so to speak? Or what's the engine and what's the bodywork? And
do you specifically related to that then, do you have like a ratio, and I don't know, maybe not, where it's like, okay, this is if we've got 10 sessions that we're picking from, this is how many, easier just volume sessions that we're going to do. This is the number of threshold sessions that we're going to do versus strength. And I don't know if it would be, maybe you would do strength and that ratio could be equal, and your threshold session is essentially like your heavier day, like you mentioned with that Monday. Do you have like a ratio that you try to follow in your planning that you try to hit?
I'd love to say yes, because it'd make it simpler, but again, working back from that sort of what is the goal we're looking to achieve. For some people, it might be 5 lifting sessions a week out of the 10 to achieve that goal. For some, it might be 2. Yeah. And I've been an example of that. So, for example, the 1,200 pound total and sub 12 hour Ironman on the same day was 3 lifting sessions a week. And they were not as demanding as the 4 lifting sessions a week that I did for the 600 kilo powerlifting total the same day as a sub 6 hour 60K. However, that was lifting and running. Mm-hmm. The other one was lifting and triathlon, which means all of a sudden I've got biking and swimming to manage as well. And there's only so many sessions you can fit within the week. So without wanting to be arbitrary, I'd say assessing weaknesses or assessing context, not necessarily weaknesses, because your context is heavier body weight, lots of muscle mass, which will come with some sort of functional and I guess, in functional tightness as well, in terms of if we were to put you in the pool and say, go and get an aerobic stimulus, you'd be 50 yards in, and all of a sudden, because you've got so much muscle mass around your shoulder, you wouldn't be able to activate your lungs because you'd be so overly dependent on not being able to move through the water in a certain way. That would be muscular. So fatigue would set in quickly. Whereas if we put you on a rower, it might mean that you might not have as much of a range of motion because of that additional muscle mass as someone more slender and built for rowing might. Even things like a bike position. If you've got more muscle mass in your legs, if you've got a thicker set of glutes, your positioning on a bike is going to be different. You're going to occlude blood differently to somebody with less muscle mass around the area. You're going to sit slightly higher up, which means that you might need to position handlebars slightly differently. And that's where I think the context is great. I think people can view these things as disadvantages rather than just problems to solve. So in your case, I think threshold, if we put it into 3 phases, phase 1 could be threshold development on the rowing machine, supplemented with zone 2 running. Phase 2 could be threshold development on the rowing machine at a lower volume, with a little bit of allocation towards some low volume threshold running, supplemented with zone 2 running. Phase 3 could be aerobic rowing, threshold running, and threshold running and aerobic running. So you're just building phase 1, you're building your threshold capacity internally. If we view cardiovascular system, you're building it internally. Phase 2, you're starting to acclimatize musculoskeletally by doing a little bit of low volume intensity. Could even just be repeated hundreds at the track just to get your legs turning over, moving a little bit quicker. You're not even out of breath, but you're just utilizing the muscles. You're being a bit snappier and you're getting used to it because there's a lot of transient impact load there. And then phase 3 is where you actually start to train your threshold from a running point of view. Because if you applied the same principles from the rowing machine straight to the running, your calves, your hips, your glutes, your hammies would be pretty sore pretty quickly. And that might be the thing that makes you go, you know what, running's not for me. And you're clearly trying to give running a go because you either want it to be for you or you'd like to have it as a training stimulus. And I think that's where people that are competent at one thing in a training setting can make an error, because you forget that the beauty of a novel stimulus is that you are a student again and that there's a learning process. And if you were to go all the way back to when you weren't competent at the thing that you're a master at or competent at currently, you wouldn't jump into the training volume that you're considering from a running point of view or a rowing point of view. So I think embracing being a beginner again, I think, is a really valuable way to look at this. And it does require acclimatization. Running specifically comes with loads of impact. Whereas for you, for example, a slightly more translatable movement pattern, sitting at 90 RPM on a C2 bike or a watt bike or something like that, is a great way to get a slightly more relevant stimulus to what will translate over to running. So actually, if we were to do those phases again, it could even be phase 1, threshold rowing, phase 2, threshold bike, phase 3, bit of both. Let's add a 4th phase, a little bit of both and a little bit of threshold running as well, because at your body weight, adding in lots of threshold running too soon is going to be the thing that beats you up. You're going to go into the gym, weights are going to feel heavy, and then you're going to feel compromised, and it's easy to just think, you know what, I'll reduce that volume and just go back to lifting weights, which is something that I did for many, many years. And I shut myself off from a huge amount of quality of life that I've now experienced by being able to do all of these amazing things that I've got to experience, fortunately, in the water, on a bike, in the hills, on the roads, whatever it might be. And part of that came from losing love of competing in a strength setting. And actually, I know we touched on it earlier, but the Husafell Stone is the most enjoyable feat of strength in any setting I've ever had by a huge margin, which is strange because it's just a field in Iceland versus a powerlifting competition.
Yeah, but I think that makes sense. Once you've achieved, like once you've separated yourself, once you've taken the ego out of yourself, you enjoy it for what it is. And I think a powerlifting sense or a weightlifting sense or a bodybuilding sense, there's still something around people in the gym, which is also cool. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think it's awesome, but I don't know. It makes sense when you're out in the field and you're just like, it's just you and this stone, you know?
We, Liam and I were laughing as well, is that we were trying to think of, is there any other discipline where you can only mimic the thing you're going to do rather than in any way prepare for like you can't replicate the uneven surface of the sheep pen. You can't replicate the exact geometry and top heaviness of the stone. You can use sandbags. You can walk up and down with it. But if you're in a swimming pool, essentially if you're competing at the Olympic Games, one swimming pool is not going to be very different to the other.
Yeah,
weightlifting. Yeah. Like everything's somewhat controlled. Even like football pitches are standardized.
Yep.
Strongman, you've got events that are different, but a Viking press, it's a slightly different geometry. You know what a Viking press is?
Yeah. But the floor and all that is going to be pretty equal.
Yeah. So it's just that's what we found so funny about it is we flew to Iceland, which is a long way, to lift or not lift a stone. And whilst we train for it, you don't know until you touch the thing how it's going to go. And that the risk and sort of, it's not like, okay, what's your first attempt? What's your second attempt? Let's see if we can PB on the third. It's, do you lift the stone or don't you? And I had the exact same feeling when we were driving up to the Dinny Stones the first time, which is my first experience of stone lifting. And again, one of the feats of strength that I'm most proud of and enjoyed the most, because it's just, you're a part of that history, which I think is amazing. And I feel very fortunate to have had the experience and the ability to be able to do that. But I think, the Husafell stone, I'd love to say, is the perfect embodiment of strength and endurance and neatly encapsulates everything I've always trained for. And maybe it is, but the one biggest takeaway that I've got from it is that there is nothing I can compare it to, because it is max effort output for much longer than you would normally max effort output for. It's like a 1RM that you hold on to for dear life. It's really, I can't even put it into words. I was laughing like a maniac at the end, because I'm so pleased to have done this, but I don't understand how to explain the uniqueness of this, which is why it was so special, because I'd prepared the stand. I watched every video on every corner of the internet. I tried every sandbag variation. I'd practiced this. I'd studied that. And Liam, who's done it 4 times and was very, very, I wouldn't have been able to do without his help and him being there on the day, had given me all of the advice in the world. But then until you're there and you do it, and I mean, it
doesn't matter until you're doing it.
It doesn't. And I got it off the floor on my 8th attempt. And on about attempt 4, I started to think, oh shit, have I flown to Iceland to not lift the stone here? Because that wasn't a nice feeling. And again, I went overconfident. I thought, you know what? Strangely, my deadlift versus my stone lifting ability, I'm actually stronger in a compromised position in my back than I am with a neutral spine, which is strange. Just biomechanically, don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm better at stones than I am at deadlifting, it seems. And I was confident. And then the 4th attempt just didn't budge at all. And looking back at the video, my feet were in the wrong place. I wasn't applying pressure in the right way. But in my head, I went, oh, you're fatigued. It's game over. And then that's where I can then tap into all of the self-doubt that I've experienced in a mile or an ultra or an Ironman or a 10K or whatever it might be, or when I'm 1 minute away from the finish line and I'm thinking, fuck, you've got to hold this pace for this long and you are clinging on for dear life. Do you have it in you? And you get to tap into that, and that melting pot of experience is what kind of makes that. I think that all of the things that came before the Husafell for me are what made the Husafell so special, because I wouldn't have been able to problem solve mental. I wouldn't have been able to not lose my head. I think I would have started flapping a little bit when I felt like I was too fatigued to do it. But I've had enough experience of taking a breath, calming things down, not being all smelling salty, 1RM, Slipknot in my ears, and sort of taking a breath and figuring this thing out. And it was just a perfect embodiment of everything before that. But it's max effort for me for it was like 48 seconds. And it was just, it's just surreal, because it was, yeah, something I've known about for years, as long as I've been powerlifting. And I never, ever thought, I didn't think anyone under 120 kilos, sort of 250 pounds, could even consider it. And I think that's what I'm proud of in many ways at a personal level, to be able to showcase that it can happen. But also, I think the thing that's allowed people to lift at a lighter body weight is better problem solving, not more strength. And I think that's quite beautiful in and of itself, because like we said right at the start, S&C is essentially problem solving. And a heavy rock on the floor, the aim is to walk it around the pen. How do you make that as efficient as possible? How do you get it to your lap so you've got as much energy as possible to walk as far as you can? Because nobody's giving you any medals for getting it to your lap in the most cumbersome and demanding way as possible. Whilst it might look cool, if you're then going to stand up and walk with it, you're going to be gassed. So, yeah, that was my main concern, was, am I going to tire myself out before I can even walk around this thing? And then I went, oh, wait a minute. Am I even going to be able to stand up with it to get the opportunity to walk with it? So it was a surreal experience. For anyone into strength sports, I hope they understand, because there were a lot of people on my YouTube shorts that didn't understand why two men flew to Iceland to lift a rock. But it's, I've lifted a lot of barbells. I've lifted a lot of dumbbells. I've hit a lot of PBs. I've been very, very proud. I've competed in some amazing competitions all over the world. And yeah, the Husafell Stone is the most memorable moment of strength I have ever experienced. Maybe because it marked a bit of a closing of the chapter of my emphasis on top end strength, whilst I prioritize what I'm training for next. But I think, yeah, it demands you to have the strength, but also to have the patience to better understand it in the moment, because it's not perfectly balanced. It's not equally weighted. It's slippy. If it gets wet, it's a nightmare. If it's muddy, it needs toweled down. If it's cold, your hands start to go. If you pick it up from one angle, it's heavier on the right-hand side. If you pick it up from another, it slips down here. If you pick it up from there, there's actually a grip for your hand, but then all of a sudden it's pulling you backwards. And you don't just get to be, I mean, if you're Hafthor Bjornsson, you can just stand up with it, right. which is different. But for me, I think that's what I love so much about it, is having the strength. Powerlifting for me is always, it's kind of engineering in many ways. It's about having the strength to move something from A to B. And that's largely a question of, do you have the strength or don't you? There's obviously a few things you can misgroove on the day, you can have a bad day, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think stone lifting is something that I hope becomes more and more popular, because I think it is a really amazing application of strength training, and has actually made my back feel better than ever, which is contrary to what most people would assume.
What's up, guys? Our podcast and our channel are sponsored by our own strength training app, Peak Strength. The entire focus of Peak Strength is to provide you guys with the absolute best sports performance app that you could ever imagine. We build out the programs on the back end. We take in all of these different decisions that we learned here on site at Garage Strength, so that we can then apply it to you so you can improve your training. So if you guys want to improve your overall sports performance, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Download Peak Strength. You'll get a free week of training, and then you can start getting on those gains, get those reps done so that you can become a champion. Now, let's get back to the video. Peace.
I was gonna say, you gotta change your deadlift technique to have a little bit more rounded back, and see if you could PR your deadlift just by doing that.
Yeah, I think I have thought about it. But it's just committing to a sort of Pete Rubish style deadlift scares me. But
I wanted to bring something up before we close out that I think is important, because you mentioned the self-doubt, closing the chapter of like that peak strength or max strength aspect. And you said something like having the patience to understand the moment and then problem solve that internally. And essentially, to me, when I was listening and I'm writing like, okay, this self-doubt of the Husafell stone and what you had to do to problem solve the stone, the ground, everything involved in that problem, in that scenario. And then what I personally have found so attractive to endurance training, and sort of linking this to endurance training, is the time, one, by yourself, but two, the time when you do, like, dude, I'll be honest, I'm a bitch when I want to run harder. I just don't want to do it. And then and I'm a little better on the rower. Ironically, I'm pretty good in the pool growing up a swimmer with my parents, but there's always self-doubt. And I wanted to tie this into, you're closing this chapter with the Husafell stone, and you've been open about mental health and mental health awareness, and just people struggling and struggling with self-doubt, and tying this into your chapter right now of training for 10 full triathlons in 10 days, which is crazy, but you're doing it for suicide awareness based off of your own experience at attempting suicide. And I wanted to just close that out with, like, the fitness aspect of how fitness is so unique around self-doubt. And I wanted to, you to just talk about that before we move on, and the importance of fitness and all these things.
Yeah, I think like I said a while ago, I think self-doubt breeds in the gray area of life. And again, like I said earlier, what I get so much from training is black and white. Do you or don't you? And when I've suffered with my mental health in the past, when it was at its worst, training has always been there. It's always been the thing I've been able to hold on to. And I think it is for a lot of people. And I'd love to ask you, we'll come back to it at the end, on what you're getting from endurance that you didn't get from strength, and how that's sort of giving you a bit of peace mentally, because I've found that to be life-changing for me. But yeah, I am currently training for 10 Ironman distance triathlons in 10 days in 10 cities here in the UK in April the 30th to May the 9th, 2026. May the 9th is going to be 10 years post-suicide attempt. So Project Tenacity, see what I did there? I'm very pleased.
Hell yeah, let's go.
Very pleased with that play on words. Is essentially for me it's a bit of a celebration for myself of how far I've come, but also I entered this world of posting about my fitness on the internet because I did a campaign for Movember where I was unhappy with my job in London. I had fallen out of love with powerlifting, and I was still kind of doing it because it was what I did, but I didn't really enjoy it, but it felt like something I had to do. And I was having a bit of an identity crisis. I didn't feel like I was going anywhere with my life, and I've always been a very driven and ambitious person. So one day I opened my laptop up and I started to feel, I was aware that I felt how I'd felt in the past. So for context, that was 2018. And from 2014 to 2016, I suffered quite severely with depression. But I'd grown up playing rugby at a reasonable level. I'd grown up being very sociable, very ambitious, very outgoing. I was blindsided by, I guess, my own ego, my lack of experience with the world, whereby I went to university in 2014 and just very quickly felt very isolated, very alone. I'd stopped playing rugby. I'd started powerlifting. I had one too many concussions. And there was no powerlifting team at the university. There was no weightlifting team at the university. I tried to start one, but that meant I was training on my own. I chose to study theology and religion at university.
That's what,
interesting. There we go.
When I watched the video, I was like, "Holy shit, dude!" I studied religious studies, and I saw that.
And here we are talking about daily undulating periodization on a podcast. That's a common. I didn't know that was a common pathway, but there we are.
Yeah.
So I chose to study theology and religion because it gave me a better chance of getting into Oxford, not because it was the primary subject I wanted to study. So the university I ended up going to, it was the one I ended up going to, obviously. But the Oxford was, for what I wanted to study, was 350 applicants to one. Theology and religion was 67 to one. So the school encouraged me to apply for the better odds. I did not win on the odds and went anyway. So again, my university subject group, I didn't really connect with anyone particularly from the off. They were predominantly scripture unionists that were doing the course, and I wasn't part of that group. So it wasn't, again, no animosity whatsoever from it. Just they very much had their own little community that I wasn't a part of, so felt isolated. in that section as well. And then my accommodation, my halls, I felt like I was kind of the last person on an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, because it was the people on my floor, don't get me wrong, lovely. I still connected with a few of them these days, all very nice people, but I just didn't have a huge amount in common. The people above me were all people that had done a gap year after school, which is where you take a year out to travel before starting college, university, done a year at a different university, left that university and then joined. So they were all on one floor. The floor below were all girls from within 20 miles of the university. And then the whole block to my left were Chinese international students. And I thought, I feel like we've all just been lumped into the last bit here. It's kind of these little categories. So I was like, what's our category? Why are we all sat here? But long story short, the people in my halls, again, very pleasant people, lovely people, but I just didn't become friends with them. And I felt very, blindsided by the fact that I'd never felt like this before. I'd never not had access to friends, social groups, team settings, team sport, a reason to get up in the morning and go and train, whatever it might be, all this sort of stuff. And I kept my loneliness to myself because I felt embarrassed by it. Long story short, slowly but surely things got worse and worse and worse. I ended up living in a different city to my university town so that I didn't live on my own in second year. And whilst that helped to start with, and I kept training, things got worse and worse steadily. And I'll hold my hand up and say that I used to think that mental health was a complete figment of the imagination, and I thought it was a load of bollocks. If you'd said you were depressed, I'd think you were just giving me an excuse to be weak, lazy, entitled. There's no such thing. And then in February 2016, it started to affect me physically, and I couldn't really sleep, couldn't really eat. I was getting split in half by weights I should be able to do with my eyes closed at the gym, and it all very quickly became quite overwhelmingly real. And I felt even stupider for being wrong about that, rather than taking the loss and going, you know what, okay, I was wrong. Mental health is a real thing. I'm not feeling good here. Can I get some help? Because the worst thing is I had access to help. My family were loving, parents still together, very fortunately. Me and my brother get on, always have. I chose to, again, embarrassment, shame, perception of masculinity were the things that prevented me from opening up. And that unfortunately got to the point where in May the 9th, 2016, I attempted suicide, because that was the conclusion that I came to in my head, because my perception of masculinity and who I believed myself to be and the expectations I had of myself, and therefore the expectations I believed other people had of me, even though they were completely self-founded, didn't allow me to share with the world that I was falling short of those expectations. So I felt like a failure, and that became paralyzing, really. And very valuable lesson in the end. And I'm very, very fortunate to have come around and ultimately bounced back quite well in the end. There's more to that I'd encourage people to go and watch the full video for, announcing the challenge, because I break it all down in detail in the locations it all happened, actually, which was
that was also freaking impressive, dude.
I was really pleased. That was a very therapeutic experience doing the media that way. Actually, I did really enjoy that. It was actually quite challenging going back to a few of the locations that I hadn't been to since that period of my life, but because I'm in a good place, it was, I don't know, it felt there was a sense of pride that I get to be here in a different headspace and just take the lessons from when I was here in a not so good headspace. So
I think that comes across too, because there was one scene I think you cut from like a dorm or something to the train, or maybe it was your apartment to the train, and then when you're talking about your pup in the window, dude, it just like it's great. It was
thank you. No, I really appreciate
awesome.
that. There was the most effort and expense I've ever put into a single video, and even if nobody had watched it, I could have looked back on it and been, you know what, that tells the story much better than. And if I ever need to remind myself of how much life since has given me, I can watch that and be very proud and be very pleased. Because huge amount of fortunate things have happened to me since: wife, dogs, it just loads. So that's the thing I still struggle with the most. And I'm in a very good place with it all. And I'm very happy having this conversation with anyone. But when I think about all of the amazing things that have happened since, that's where it just starts to, I don't know, frazzle my mind a bit that one decision almost meant none of that ever would have happened. And that's where that's tough. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And in 2018, having recovered, I felt like I was going backwards again, but I knew what this feeling was. So rather than retreating and making things worse like I did previously, I thought, you know what? Let's do something. What are you missing? A sense of fulfillment. How do you find one? Okay. Fitness challenge. You like what you're good at? Good at squatting. Okay. Movember, charity, mustache, men's health. You can talk about that. This is something you can get your teeth stuck into. 2018, started sharing my sort of training and my story with the world, and started fundraising over the next 3 years for Movember through a variety of strength endurance challenges. And then that's where the YouTube channel started. That's where the Instagram started. And that's where all the training knowledge and attention came from. I mean, I'd coached the rugby team at school once I'd stopped playing. I helped with the S&C coaching at the school that I was at with the rugby because I'd had too many concussions. I was coaching people from a strength point of view whilst I was at university. It's always been a part of me. And this was me making it a part of outwardly rather than just how I train. And accidentally, it's snowballed, and here we are. But I think that's the key, is that 2020 was the last big charity focus campaign that I did, because ironically, the scale of these projects was starting to affect my mental health. They were getting too demanding, and bills need to be paid at the end of the day. And I put a lot into those projects. I got a huge amount out of them personally, had some very amazing conversations, and know for a fact they had a positive impact on people's lives. And then from 2020 was when I did the 500-pound squat and sub 5-minute mile. Mm-hmm. That's where I've sort of carved out this, I guess, documentation of my training journey in the hybrid athlete training space online. And I've experienced some amazing things, achieved some amazing things, fallen short of a few things, and love the process. There's been challenges along the way. Don't get me wrong, 100%, of course, from a business, a training, personal, family point of view, everything, always. But that's the beauty of it all. And I have felt, the marathon taught me this really, is I am in this for a sense of fulfillment and purpose. It's not to shave minutes off my time or to get a medal around my neck at the end of it. It's to create something, to have an impact, to feel like I'm contributing, and to share a message that's very important to me. And the longing that I had for a charity endurance project that gave men predominantly, but not exclusive to men, the opportunity to latch on to my endurance that's going to be very publicly documented through 10 Ironman distance triathlons in 10 cities in 10 days. I want the project to be more of a road show than it is a endurance challenge, because in every city we've got a pool. We're hopefully going to have a few racetracks in some of the cities, but if not, there'll be bike routes, and then a athletics track for the marathon. So the aim is to fill every pool, get as many people out on the bike as possible, and to fill the athletics track with people coming to run their first 400 meters since high school, or swim their first length since high school, or whatever it might be, and know that they're in a space where everybody here has shown up. That's amazing. There is a demanding, resilient endurance challenge going on, which disarms the talking about this stuff as weak narrative, which there's still a lot of. And I personally view vulnerability as a superpower. I view it as Louis Simmons, highlighting your weaknesses so that they can become strengths. How are you going to get stronger, and how are you going to get better if you avoid confronting your emotional awareness, the things that are important to you, the things that make you happy, the things that don't make you happy, how you feel in certain situations, how you respond to certain situations. The only way you can improve all those things is by exposing yourself to them and improving understanding. So I avoiding vulnerability nearly killed me. I now actively go looking for it. And what I hope this project will create is the opportunity for people to feel very comfortable in being a little bit vulnerable, so that they can meet some people in a similar situation. They can feel like they're not alone. they can come and say hello and to what I'm doing, and that might be enough for them to get in the pool to swim 25 meters, which would be amazing. And if it gets somebody moving, if it gets somebody talking, or if it gets some people connected, then it's a massive success. And I don't really care what the rest of the project looks like, because that's what I want it to be for. But I think there's going to be a real power. The aim of the project is that I hope there's going to be a real power in bringing people together for a cause where I can kind of be the idiot at the center of it that's that's just taking it from city to city. But I'm very excited, and it's a project I've been thinking on for many years now. But I've needed workload, I've needed training load, I've needed life in general to be in the right place to take on something of this scale. But I don't really care about performance as much as some people on the internet care about my performance. I do care about performance. Don't get me wrong. I've done a lot of performance-oriented goals, but I pursue performance goals because of what it gives me and what it makes me, not because of the outcome itself. Mm-hmm. And I'm biased. I've come back from a suicide attempt. I'm very biased. It's been life-changing and eye-opening for me that learning to enjoy the process rather than emphasizing the outcome is the only way to be truly successful, in my opinion, in my definition of success. And I think the internet, from a strength training and endurance training, from a hybrid training point of view, has factions. I think there's a lot of people that like to put parameters or boundaries around certain things, which I don't think helps those people from embracing the enjoyment of the process. I'm firmly of the belief that the more people trying more things can only lead to net positive outcomes, and that anyone that is protective over those things because of their own ego is doing the sport that they probably love a disservice. And I'd say strength training's actually probably one of the better ones for it. It's still got it, but I think road cycling, running, triathlon, there's a lot of protection of barriers to entry. And I've made my mission reducing the barrier to entry to these things because I've experienced firsthand how much there is to gain from entry, so to speak. And if the project can be the entry point for a conversation, a swim, a bike, a run, somebody doing their own challenge, we've got mechanics so that anyone can get involved from anywhere in the world with virtual cycling, with virtual running. There's lots of stuff happening. And I'm very excited. I'm very intimidated, more by the logistics and the cost than the actual training at this point, which is good. It's if you keep yourself busy, then you can't deal with your problems. I think is a very, very tried out method in human nature, and one that I've borne the brunt of in the past. But the good news is I can just get my head down and do the training. I am 5 months out as well, which helps. Yeah, but I don't need to worry too much at the moment, because what I'm worried about now is all of the other stuff. So when I start worrying about the training, shit's getting real, so to speak. But that's where things are for me. And I think if I wanted to be poetic about it and say, what do I want my impact on the world to be? I love making content on YouTube, but what excites me and makes me feel like I'm genuinely contributing beyond on a balance sheet in a business or metrics on YouTube is facilitating. If I'm being honest, I just want to be the person that I needed to see or know about when I was in the place that I was. I was a young man that was misguided and didn't feel like I had anyone that I could look up to, I felt so cripplingly alone that if I can be the person that would have made me not feel alone, I'll be very proud of myself.
Yeah, and in doing that, I would say you're facilitating a sense of fulfillment and purpose for individuals, where it's like, okay, one, you're demonstrating that you want individuals to be more vulnerable, to engage with vulnerability, and recognize that when you are handling this weakness, that's when you can grow the most and engage with that superpower, like you'd mentioned. But also, then you're providing, I think oftentimes too, what fitness and these goals can be is literally like just a step into that little realm. And that's where endurance can play a big role. It's like you have time to spend with yourself, and the self-doubt then becomes time to enjoy yourself. You start to realize, like, I'm not a bad person. I can enjoy this time alone. I can enjoy the repetitive motion of endurance leads to greater fulfillment, I think.
So what, on that note, I've remembered, I'm glad I have, after my long ramble, I wanted to ask you this. What have you, obviously very powerful, very, very creatine phosphate driven background. What have you taken at a personal level, not necessarily a physical level, but of course there'll be physical benefits as well. But what are the benefits of implementing some endurance training, some more cardiovascular training that you've taken personally, mentally? I mean, you've mentioned a few already in terms of that time with your own head. I think that's one of the most valuable things possible. It's actually really hard to create in the modern world.
Yeah, I think that is the number one thing for me, is that I am someone like, in the US, there's like this culture of cutting your grass. Okay. You go out and you mow your lawn, right? And I never understood why my dad always wanted to cut the grass. And even when I could start cutting the grass, he would still want to cut the grass. I don't get why he's doing this. And I know this sounds crazy, but then, so if you're American, you understand like how this is. As I got older, and I always was very, very bad at running. So everything I did was, I was a sprint swimmer, I was a shot putter, I was a D tackle football player. So it was always short bursts.
Power.
Yeah. And then when I got into running, I would just happen to be at a hotel, and I went on a treadmill. I was like, I wonder if I could run a mile. And I just wanted to see if I could do it. And when I had never run a mile like consistently, and this was just 2.5 years ago, I ran a mile, and I was like, holy shit, dude, I ran a mile. And then all of a sudden, when I came home from this trip, I was in Peru. I was like, I wonder if I can run to my parents' house. So for like 3 days, I ran like a mile, and then I ran to my parents' house, which was 3+ miles. And I remember I was almost in tears, like genuinely. And I am an emotional individual. I have my own psychological issues, not issues, but like vulnerability issues and judgments constantly. And for me, it was exactly that. Is like the time of just thinking and accepting my thoughts and accepting who I am and accepting other things that have happened in my life. And it's like the repetitive nature, and I come back from a run or on the rower, and I feel like I can solve all my life problems. That's it. It's like I come home, and then now, my wife has always been a runner, ironically. So for she and I to do that together now, it's like, it's the greatest thing. And she and I have the best conversations when we're running. And I think it's like, when I lift, and dude, I'm still addicted to lifting, but when I lift, I still can get distracted because I'm in the gym, I'm around my athletes, and I'm like, I have my phone. But when I'm running or I'm on the rower or something like that, it's just me. And I think that's the whole thing, is like, that's what I loved about seeing what you were doing, is like, dude, think about what that distance, the time people have. Eventually, you listen to people talk about meditation and how it takes years to even learn that you're actually meditating before you're just quiet sitting, and then it becomes meditative. And I think that's how endurance training is for me individually, is it's just become this process of like, now I'm starting to realize like I'm quieting my thoughts. I'm not judging myself because I'm spending time with self-doubt, and I'm realizing the purpose and my own purpose in life. Right. And I think that's it. That's it for me.
Do you feel a bit more chaotic and like your thoughts are swirling around in your head a little bit more if you've gone a couple of days, a week or so, without having had some sort of aerobic zone 2 time?
Yeah. So my wife thinks I'm crazy because we go on like a 10+ mile run on Saturdays. And then on Sunday, I'll go out and I'll run another like 7.5 miles. And she's like, how do you do that? I'm like, I have to do, I just want to. Today I didn't run. And it was like the 6 days in a row I ran. I lifted today, but I'm like, fuck, I didn't run. I didn't go out and run. Like, and we have a treadmill here, and people think I'm insane because I'll come in. I just want to go on the treadmill. But that's also like, I'm so scatterbrained. I'm a likely
severely ADHD. I've never been diagnosed, but I likely am on that aspect because I have had also. I dropped out of college for a semester because of my own mental issues. Like genuinely, I wasn't going to class. I was just very heavy into drinking. So I have an addictive personality. And it's like, when I don't run, or if I'm not on the assault bike, or if I'm not rowing, I'm like how you just described that.
Yeah. I think, now I'm about 10 weeks back into triathlon training, and the admin that goes with 3 sports plus lifting rather than just 1 sport plus lifting is significant. Yeah. Swimming pool opening times and bike admin are the bane of my life at the moment. And I've had some hilarious weeks where, not for want of trying, I've not ridden my bike. Swimming pools. Oh, sorry, there's a school swimming gala on today. You can't use the pool, even though we allowed you to book online. Great, thank you. I'm so glad I traveled an hour for this. And I think it's reminded me of how much better a human being I am.
Yeah.
When I get up early in the morning and I get that time in my own head before the day kicks off.
Yep.
Whereas with the marathon prep, with previous events in the past, if it just becomes about the training and it becomes about ticking the boxes, then it doesn't become as much about that sort of
the purpose.
that time with myself, that purpose, that reflection. And I do think that is the biggest benefit that I've taken from training this way, and something I always want to hold on to is
you just said the word there, reflection. That's it right there.
Yeah. Aerobic, zone 2, easy, conversational, whatever you want to call it. That low intensity, steady state Saturday morning for me has been a staple for 7-8 years now, and has been the single most life-changing thing for my mental well-being as well as my fitness, because it gives me a set time in the diary to get outdoors, be alone with my thoughts. I'll never wear headphones. I could be getting battered about by the snow, the wind. I could be in amazing sun somewhere in the world. Whatever it is, it's always different because I've always got different thoughts and I've always got different lessons. And I carry, I'm on number 6 or 7 by this point, but I've got a little notepad, cheap one that I get from Amazon, that I have by my front door. Every house that I've been in, it's been on different console tables by the front door. And every long run, every long ride, every long swim I come back in from, first thing I do when I open the door, scratch the dogs, and then I'm scribbling in that notebook, because I don't take my phone with me. I don't look at my phone when I'm out riding, running. So I'm like, oh, fuck, I've got to write this down. I need to remember that process thoughts and then get it down. Shit. And some of the big decisions I've made, some of the biggest business changes, pivots, changes, whatever it might be that have been made, have come from thoughts that have developed or been sort of engendered in those training sessions. So no, we're very similar in that sense, which is cool. I think that's where anyone coming from a strength background, don't
make yourself vulnerable. Go out and do what you suck at.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the most powerful thing we can do in training, finance, business, relationships, anything. I think if you suck at something and you know you suck at something, but you'd like to, do it. But microdose. Start small. Don't start as if you've been doing it forever because you've been doing something else forever. And embrace being a student, because being a student's fun because you make loads of gains really quick. Yep. Every session is a win.
Fergus, I got to shut this off because I have a warning right now from my computer that my battery is dying. So
all good, my man.
This was awesome. Again, the selfishness for me, I'm literally writing like, I got to make this as quick so that we get the recording quick. I'm going down. I'm like, I got to figure out how to handle the threshold work. 1, to not be a bitch, but 2, so that I can justify the rower as some of my threshold work too. So, this was great. And I hope everybody stays tuned to what you're doing with Project Tenacity as well. So thank you.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate it. And have a good rest of the day. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You too. Peace.